Hello everybody and welcome to Tiger Tales The Lost Stories, a place you'll find stories and fan fictions in the first person perspective, written and read to you by me, Tiger. Welcome to the Tiger Tales Marvel and DC fanfiction universe, an ongoing collective stories in one whole universe between Marvel and DC, where I've combined the two universes into one, and there's multiple ongoing storylines in a particular order. You can listen to a majority of them on the Tiger Tales channel, but I thought I'd bring some of the storylines here, put them in the first person perspective, but not only that, I can continue some other storylines or other big things that are happening on Tiger Tales. Today we dive back into the son of Darkseid. We have Darkseid, the leader of the Apocalypse planet, but he's injured and needs to recover. And as he's slowly building up the strength, he has his new, air quote, son go off and do his deed for him. And that's where our character main resides. Dante, the son of Darkseid, goes off and does his work for him. And we get to see all sorts of adventures. So let's dive in. In the last chapter, Dante had to kidnap Hank Pym because Darkseid needed his help. And now he's on a mission to take down a witch because Darkseid needs a witch for a ceremony to allow Darkseid forces to get through to Earth without anyone realizing. So let's dive in with The Son of Darkseid, Chapter 2, Monsters from a Pocket Dimension versus the Runaway Witch. I climbed out the shower, and I got dressed. I dried my hair when suddenly my father's voice rang in my head.
My son, go see Pym. He has something for when you go get our sorceress.
Darkseid told me. Fine, I muttered. I then headed for Hank's lab. I walked in and found Hank tinkering with something. You settling in okay? I told him. Well, you got me abducted by alien overlord, then you kind of have to just deal with it, Hank said with a small grin. What's my father got you working on anyway? I asked him. Parademons, Darkseid, his army. He wants to adapt the Pym particles so that he can shrink down, like I used to as Ant-Man, Hank explained. My father told me you have something for me, I said with a sigh. Then Hank put down his tools, walked over to another table, and passed me two small balls. The top half of them was red, and the bottom half was made out of wood. There was a silver ring going around the middle of each of the spheres, and each one had a pin in the center. They were rather light, but had weight to them. The weight of power. And what are these? I asked him, confused. You're going against Nico, a very powerful witch, the daughter of even a more powerful witch. She was once part of the Runaways. Now she lives underground in magical caverns. Now those balls have creatures inside of them. I spent many years in the quantum realm. I found a dimension full of magical and special creatures. I managed to get a few of them and build capsule devices that hold them using Pym particles to shrink them down and sedate them, keeping them in some sort of sleep state. Just pull the pin, Hank told me. I shrugged and placed the two balls in my pocket. You might need the edge. Once I found out it was Nico, I thought, hey, why not help? Hank shrugged. Thanks. I gotta go now. I'll let you get on, I told him. Then Hank placed his hand on my shoulder. Words of advice, I figured out the demons' names. Figured out they would respond well if you called them correctly. Now, I don't know it in their language exactly. It's been a couple years. But I was managed to translate them in English, which they also respond to, Hank told me. He told me their names, which I laughed at because they were absolutely ridiculous. But I was met with Hank's serious expression. I said my goodbyes and left Hank's laboratory. Then I headed out for this Nico witch my father wanted. I opened a boom tube and walked out through it. I entered a desert. Sands and rock laid everywhere. I stood there at an entrance to an underground tunnel. The night sky filled with nothing but stars.
Find the sorceress and take her to the gateway. We need to start the spell as soon as possible.
Darkseid told me in my mind. Yes, father. I shall let you know when I have her, I told my father. Then I walked through the tunnels, making my way through the rocky terrain. I finally found a big room, and there, floating with her legs crossed, was Nico. You dare enter my lair, Nico growled. Sorry, gorgeous. Can't help it. My father needs you, I grinned. You regret coming, Nico barked. Then I bolted forward, and I jumped towards her with great speed. I crashed into her. We both crashed to the ground. I pinned her to the ground with one hand and punched her in the face. She then spat a mouthful of blood at me. She grinned as her lip dripped down her chin. when blood is shed, let the staff of one emerge, she called out. Then her magical staff surged out of her chest and smacked me, sending me flying up. I dropped down, then her magical staff came out of her. Nico's body swung up to her feet as she gripped her staff. I landed on my 2 feet. Nice staff you got there, I muttered. This is the staff of one, and it will end you. Nico growled at me. Sorry, gorgeous, but gotta come with me, I barked back. Nico spun the staff and slammed it on the ground. She muttered something in Latin. Suddenly, rocks started flying off the walls and flew at me. My eyes lit up red as the omega beams erupted from my eye sockets and bolted around the room, breaking all the rocks into pieces. Then Nico held up her staff, and a bolt of fire exploded from it and flew at me. I spun my arms up into my face, covering my face, and the fire hit me. I slid backwards as it hit me full on. Then I bolted for Nico. I swung my arms up as she swung her staff. I was thrown by magical forces and slammed into a wall. I stood up and grunted slightly. I then remembered the 2 sapphires that Hank gave me. I pulled out one and it tripled in size, fitting in my palm quite nicely now. I then pulled the pin and threw the ball in the air. I call forth the charred lizard, I yelled. The ball exploded open and white light shot out and something started growing, becoming bigger. It stood at 5 foot. It was an orange dragon, who stood on its hind legs. Its front arms were equipped with sharp claws. It had dull horns, rather big horns, and had a long tail with a flame coming out the end. Holy crap! I muttered. The charred lizard ran at Nico, who jumped into the air and dodged the snap of its mighty jaw. Nico then aimed her staff and fired a blast of ice, which hit the charred lizard's mouth, freezing it solid. I then jumped up and slammed my fists, hitting Nico. She fell to the ground hard. She grunted in pain. As I landed, the charred lizard clenched its jaw and broke the ice. Then it roared loudly and breathed a blast of fire. I could feel the heat coming from it. Nico jumped to her feet and slammed her staff on the ground, and a dull white shimmer of energy wrapped around her like a bubble, forming a solid shield. The breath of fire hit the bubble, and I could see Nico struggling to keep her spell active. The brute force of the fire was making things difficult for her. I then opened a boom tube and put my hand through it. Then a boom tube opened behind Nico. My hand reached out and I grabbed her by the hood and I pulled her through, and she dropped her staff. I pulled her through the boom tube and threw her at the charred lizard, who swung its mighty tail and smacked Nico in the back, making her fly back at me. I caught her by the throat. She tried to struggle in my grasp, but I tightened my grip and cut her oxygen intake. Her eyes rolled in the back of her skull as she fell unconscious. I draped the witch over my shoulder as I held out the Pym capsule ball. All right, charred lizard. Thank you. Return to your tiny slumber, I called out. The orange dragon roared at me as a red beam shot from the ball and hit it. It shrunk down to tiny size once more, and the beam retracted the small demonic monster and sealed it back inside the sphere. The pin reappeared once more, and the ball shrunk down to its dormant state once again. I placed the ball back in my pocket, and I opened a boom tube. I walked through it and entered the cave. There, the 3 worshippers I saved beforehand were preparing for a ceremony. The large stone table was placed in the centre, with spell runes and tribal markings all over it. Candles were lit. I placed Nico down on the table and turned to the worshippers. Keep an eye on her. She's important for my father's plan, I ordered. We understand, my lord. She is the witch who will do the spell? He asked me. Yes, if anything happens, I'll cut your skin off with a blunt kitchen knife, I threatened. Yes, my lord. We shall keep an eye on her at all times, the worshipper said with a bow. I opened a boom tube and walked through it. The boom tube closed behind me as I entered my father's chambers. I've required Nico. She sleeps at the gateway, I told my father.
Well done, my son. The witch has impressive abilities. She was a worthy opponent.
My father said. Thank you, father, I said with a slight bow.
Go rest, my son. Tomorrow our quest continues.
He demanded. Yes, I nodded. Then I walked away and I headed to my quarters and fell asleep rather quickly. The next morning I awoke. I ate something, got dressed, and headed to see my father. When I entered the medical chamber, I found his medical tube empty. I turned to the parademons who stood guard. Where is he? I barked. They growled and made noises, but I understood exactly what they said. I bolted for the throne room and bolted in to find Darkseid sat on his throne. He had some wires leading into his arm, but he sat there. Father, are you okay? I asked him.
I am almost at full capacity. and soon our invasion will begin.
Darkseid barked. Good father, I am pleased to see you up and about, I told him.
Your next mission is to help Dr. Pym. He needs some piece of technology to help him with his current task. Aid him in acquiring it.
Darkseid ordered. I bowed to my father and turned around. I did not know whether him being up and about was a good thing or not. I was happy that my father was almost at full health, but something kept on niggling at me, turning in my stomach. I was unsure on what it was. And there you have it, guys. Another installment to the Son of Darkseid. I really hope that you enjoyed this chapter. As you can see, there are a few hints. A big shout out to Jared, the man who owns If You Give a Dad a Podcast. He's the voice of Darkseid, and he does a fantastic job of it. I also have been recently on his podcast, and both of us appeared on the 100th episode of the Zero to Hero podcast, so make sure you go check out both the podcasts I just mentioned. That being said, make sure you check out Tiger Tales, because there are more Marvel and DC storylines all sharing the same universe on that channel. Make sure you check out Tiger Tales Game Over, a place where you'll find more stories and fanfictions, but all of them revolve around video games in some way or another. And of course, subscribe to this channel so you don't miss another story. Thank you all for watching, and I shall see you guys really soon.